The hook. The war in Europe was over, but the fight had just begun. It wouldn't be fought with tanks or planes, but with secrets, bribes, and stolen files. The prize wasn't land, it was the human mind. Specifically, the minds of the men who had just built the Vengeance Weapon 2, the rocket that had terrorized London. This is the story of how America decided that to win the future, it had to bargain with the devil and steal his scientists. Project Paperclip, the devil's bargain. The sound came first, not a whistle like a conventional artillery shell, but a deafening, tearing rip in the fabric of the sky. Then silence. A dreadful, heart-stopping pause that lasted 3, maybe 4 seconds. For the citizens of London in the autumn of 1944, this silence was the true face of terror. It was the sound of the Vergeltungswaffe 2, the V-2 rocket, breaking the sound barrier, traveling faster than the noise of its own approach. The explosion, when it finally came, was catastrophic, leveling entire city blocks without a whisper of warning. This was a new kind of war. This was the future. Across the English Channel, in the heavily forested coastal region of Peenemünde on the Baltic Sea, the rocket's chief architect, Wernher von Braun, watched his creations fly. He was young, impossibly charismatic, a brilliant engineer with the matinee idle looks of a movie star. He was also a member of the Nazi Party and an officer in the dreaded SS. Von Braun didn't dream of conquering London. He dreamed of the stars. He dreamed of landing a man on the moon. But to build his colossal rockets, he had made a pact with the only power willing to fund his celestial ambitions, Adolf Hitler. And to build the V-2, von Braun and his superior, General Walter Dornberger, presided over a hell on earth. As Allied bombing raids intensified on Peenemünde, production was moved to an underground factory called Mittelwerk, tunneled into the Harz Mountains. The factory was a nightmare. The laborers were not German workers. They were slave laborers from the nearby Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. They were French, Polish, Dutch, and Russian prisoners, starved, beaten, and worked to death in 24-hour shifts. They assembled the rockets in suffocating dust, slept in the damp tunnels where they worked, and died by the thousands. More people died building the V-2 rocket than were killed by it in combat. This was the moral stain at the heart of the technology that would one day take humanity to the moon.
There was just one enormous problem. President Harry S. Truman had issued a clear directive. The U.S. would not offer haven to ardent Nazis. He wanted German science, but not the German ideology that had poisoned it. This created a dilemma for the men at the new Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or GIOA, the shadowy organization tasked with the recruitment. They sent agents to interrogate the captured German scientists who were being held at a Bavarian farmhouse codenamed Camp Dustbin. What they found was alarming. Wernher von Braun wasn't just a casual member of the Nazi Party. He was a Sturmbannführer, or major, in the SS, personally awarded a medal by Hitler. Arthur Rudolph, the brilliant production chief who had made the V-2 fly, had been the operations director at the Mittelwerk factory, the man who directly oversaw the use of 20,000 slave laborers, of whom at least 6,000 were worked to death. Dr. Hubertus Strughold, the father of space medicine, had been linked to horrific high-altitude and freezing experiments on prisoners at the Dachau concentration camp. These men weren't just scientists, they were, by any reasonable definition, war criminals. Their files were stained with the blood and horror of the Nazi regime. This is where Operation Paperclip moved from simple military recruitment to a deep, systematic conspiracy.
The men at the GIOA knew that if these unbleached files reached President Truman's desk, or worse, the press, the entire program would be shut down. The scientists would be tried at Nuremberg, and their priceless knowledge would be lost, or worse, fall into Soviet hands. So, they began to lie. The U.S. military, in a flagrant violation of its own government's orders, began a process of bleaching the files. They needed to make these men palatable for import into the United States. An agent at the GIOA would receive the file for a brilliant chemist or rocket engineer. The file would clearly state SS officer, or active participant in Nazi atrocities. The agent would take a paperclip, a simple, ubiquitous metal office supply, and attach a new fabricated biography to the front of the file. This new cover sheet would omit the inconvenient facts. SS Major became reluctant participant. Overseer of slave labor became forced to work by the regime. Ardent Nazi became never politically active. The paperclip itself was the physical marker of the lie. The incriminating original documents were hidden beneath the new sanitized summary. When the files were passed up the chain of command, busy officials and State Department visa officers would only read the clean summary on top. The dark truth remained, held fast by a simple piece of bent wire. One by one, the men who had built Hitler's terror weapons were approved for travel. In late 1945, the first group, including Wernher von Braun himself, was put on a ship, their pasts laundered, their futures bright. They were not told they were emigrating. They were being given a temporary 6-month work contract. They landed in Delaware and were immediately put on a train. They traveled for days, seeing a country untouched by the war that had ravaged their homeland. They arrived not in a gleaming city or a high-tech university, but in the desolate, sun-scorched expanse of the West Texas desert, Fort Bliss, near El Paso. Their new home was a collection of dilapidated army barracks with peeling paint and sputtering plumbing. Their new job, to reassemble the V-2 rockets they had shipped from Germany and teach American soldiers how to fire them. This was not the America they had dreamed of. They were prisoners of peace, unable to leave the base without an escort, their mail censored, their families still trapped in war-torn Germany. The American engineers and soldiers they worked with were deeply suspicious of them. These were, after all, the men who had been trying to kill them just a few months earlier. The irony was palpable. The world's most advanced rocket scientists, men who dreamed of conquering the solar system, were now stuck in the middle of the Chihuahuan desert firing old rockets at empty patches of sand, their futures and the morality of the nation that had saved them hanging precariously in balance. The bargain had been struck, the paperclips were in place, and the consequences of this decision would echo for decades, from the dark tunnels of Mittelwerk to the bright, shining surface of the moon.